Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to today's Play Attention webinar. My name is Gwen Sorley, and I will be your host today. This is number 7 in our webinar series on executive function. So we've gone up to number 7 now, and we have one more, number 8, that is upcoming in February. I'm so glad to see many of the names I've seen over the past few weeks. Many of you have attended all of these webinars or a majority of the webinars, and I do hope that you have found them very helpful. And if you have missed any of these webinars, just remember they are all posted on our website. So if you go to playattention.com and then click on the webinars tab, and then go down to special webinar recordings, you will see there we have the list of all the webinars we've done so far. They include not only the webinar recording, but a podcast version and also an ebook that goes along with the webinar. So make certain if you've missed any of these webinars that you do visit our website and download any of that information that you'll find helpful. If at any time you have questions, please do type your questions in the chat box. And Diana has already put in her question. You are correct. The 6th webinar is not posted yet. It is slated to be posted tomorrow. So thank you for pointing that out. But Diana, please do check back again tomorrow morning because it is slated to be there in the morning. Thank you. All right, and we are recording this event. So at the end of the webinar, you'll receive a replay link so that you can share this webinar with any family members or staff members who maybe were not able to attend the live event. So today we're talking about self-monitoring. And I know that many of you are probably very familiar with the term self-monitoring, and you may have already started or tried some of these techniques that I'm going to talk about today. What I'm hoping for today is that we are very specific in how we discuss how to make a plan to help develop self-monitoring and why self-monitoring is so important. Because we might get to the section where we're talking about charts and graphs and how to follow through with those types of materials. And you think, oh, I did that at one point when my child was in 4th grade. And maybe you never made the connections between what you were doing with those charts and how it's connected to developing self-monitoring. So I really do hope that I can kind of bring it all together for you so that we can make a very specific plan to help you, your child, or your students start developing strong self-monitoring skills. Now, we should start, of course, with what is self-monitoring? So self-monitoring is the brain's ability to both observe and evaluate one's performance in real time. And I think what's important there is to really focus on that, those words, real time, right? That it's ability to evaluate performance in real time. So many times we do reflection after the fact, and that's helpful in the development of self-monitoring. But if we are truly good self-monitors, it means that we are in the moment self-monitoring our actions, performance. So self-monitoring is a process of executive function. And you'll notice as we go through this presentation today that it is so interrelated with all of those other areas of executive function that we've talked about so far. So as always, it is very important to continually strengthen certain cognitive skills in order to improve all areas of executive function. So we use self-monitoring in every part of our day, from cooking your favorite dinner to communicating with your peers, or perhaps solving a math equation. So this video on the screen, I'm sure everyone can relate to this, right? At some point, you have been cooking your favorite meal. And as you're cooking, you're self-monitoring. You're looking at what you're making, you're smelling it, you're tasting it to make certain that your performance is good. Your performance is on target, right? Because if you take that taste and you know you're slightly off target, you can then adjust. And I'm sure that many of us here have gotten to the end of a recipe. We didn't self-monitor necessarily throughout that process. I've done this where I made a whole thing of biscuits, and at the very end, I took them out of the oven and I had put in way too much salt. I had my brother-in-law one Christmas made these pizzelles. They're very Italian. So they made their Nana's favorite pizzelles. And instead of using flour, he used powdered sugar. Not really the intended outcome. And he didn't self-monitor throughout that process or taste or look, smell. And so at the end of the day, we're all eating these pizzelles that are made completely with way too much sugar. So you're always self-monitoring down to that little task like cooking. So successful people have the ability to think about why something is not working and then take an action in order to solve the problem. Okay, so you are able to think why something isn't working and then take action in order to solve that problem. Let's look at a comparison between a good self-monitor and a poor self-monitor. And you can kind of think about your students or your child, or maybe it's even yourself. And we're going to talk about, in this example, the reading process, okay? This is the reading process of a good self-monitor. Remember, monitoring in the moment. Student A reads a paragraph and realizes that she didn't understand or doesn't understand what she just read. So there's the problem, right? Right away after reading that paragraph, she realizes, because she's self-monitoring, she doesn't understand what she read. So she rereads in order to make sense of what she read. Or perhaps she looks up unfamiliar vocabulary. She may even ask a parent or a teacher or maybe a friend to clarify some of the parts in that reading material. So she actually used problem-solving techniques until the material was understood. This all happened in the moment. Now let's look at student B, who has poor self-monitoring. She read the words in a paragraph, because remember, she can read the words, but not necessarily read for meaning. So she read the words in the paragraph, but doesn't understand what was read. She then does not monitor her own cognitive processes, so she doesn't realize there's a problem. The teacher then asks her to summarize what was read upon completion. So she read that paragraph, she didn't quite understand it, and she kept reading and reading till the end of the assignment without doing any adjustments, without problem solving. And then suddenly the teacher is asking her to give a summary. When that happens, since she doesn't know how to problem solve and she didn't realize that there was a problem because she was not self-monitoring, she ends up having an emotional response or a behavioral response. How many of you, and you can type in the chat box or raise your hand, how many of you have experienced this? Maybe you can think about your own child, right? He rushes through the assignment just to get it done. That's part of executive function, right? That inhibitory control. If he lacks inhibitory control, then he'll just rush through the material to get it done. Since he is rushing and he doesn't have good inhibitory control, then he's not self-monitoring as he goes through that process. So then he gets the assignment done. He, in his mind, is done with the assignment. And then you go back and you look at that assignment and you start pointing out the errors and you start asking him to make corrections. And then you have this explosive or emotional response because there's a lack of also emotional control. So you see how all of those areas of executive function can come into play here. So not only self-monitoring, but inhibitory control and also emotion regulation. So again, we have to work on strengthening cognitive skills in order to improve all of these areas. Kristen says, yes, my son does this sometimes. It seems to get better if I asked him to tell me what he read. When I read to him, though, even if he's literally climbing on something, he hears and understands every word. Good. So it really comes down to comprehension when he's reading the written word himself. He's much more auditory learner, can understand that way. So Kristen, it's a good idea for you to help him with that. Like you said, just stop at certain increments and ask him along the way what he just read. And through that process, you're going to actually help him develop that ability to do it on his own, so that eventually you don't have to be there saying, now, what did you just read? What did you just read? And he'll be able to develop that on his own. Andy says, some pupils in class special needs, poor monitoring and self-regulation, unable to process understanding, leading to behaviors. Absolutely. So that inability to self-monitor and regulate does oftentimes end up in an emotional response. So let's look at some other indications. And of course, these aren't all of them, but some indications for you to consider that may point to the fact that your child is struggling with self-monitoring. You may notice that he or she doesn't recognize mistakes when proofreading, writing assignment, or checking math for errors. Perhaps your child or your student consistently turns in assignments with careless errors, and you know they know the material. It's just that they're not self-monitoring throughout the process. So it's not that they need help with the academic part. They know the material. It's just the self-monitoring that they struggle with. Has a hard time determining whether the directions that were given were actually followed. Maybe he or she doesn't know when to ask for help. Has a hard time deciding which operation or operations to use for mathematical word problem, right? You can check your addition and subtraction by using addition and subtraction, or your multiplication by using division. So do they know how to self-correct and self-monitor? When decoding a word, perhaps your child doesn't self-check to make certain that the word makes sense in the context of the sentence. So if you have an early reader and she's reading a book aloud to you and she says, she reads aloud, I saw a bunny hope through the forest, and she keeps going, right? Well, that doesn't make sense. If she was self-monitoring, she would have stopped and said, not hope, hop. I saw a bunny hop through the forest. So that's part of self-monitoring. Perhaps your child or your student doesn't seem to make the connections between how his behavior may affect another individual. So self-monitoring plays a big role in peer relationships and communication. Or your child or student may have difficulty adjusting behaviors to social cues or situations. So perhaps a child may fall on the playground and is sad or upset, and your child doesn't really adjust to that situation and is laughing where others are showing concern. So self-monitoring and adjusting, really important, not only in academics, but social situations as well. So we know that self-monitoring is very important. Uh, Thank you, Tina. Thanks for coming today. We're glad to see you here again today. And so self-monitoring is very effective in a variety of areas. It helps increase more appropriate behaviors, increasing on-task behavior in the classroom, also helps completion of homework assignments, improving both academic performance and social skills, and can be used to reduce disruptive behaviors. So all of these are really key in self-monitoring. And ideally, self-monitoring will occur naturally or intrinsically as we're engaged in a task. But remember, that's not always true. That's not always the case. As we mentioned, self-monitoring is a process of executive function. And we're not born with strong executive function. However, we do all have the potential to develop strong executive function. So there are certain steps that we can start taking to help our child or our students or even yourself become agents of change, right? Become better at self-monitoring. And self-monitoring ensures these techniques we're going to talk about will actually ensure that the students are actively engaged in the intervention being the steps we take in order to help develop that self-monitoring. And it also makes the expectations clear. And we're going to talk about how to break that down because sometimes we know the expectation and we assume our child or our student or our client knows the expectation, but we never actually stated it in a clear, concise way. So let's take some steps in order to make everything clear and get your child or student actively involved in the process of developing self-monitoring. Of course, the very first thing is we have to have a target, right? What is our target? What are we going to try to improve? So the target can include behaviors that you want to increase. Those behaviors may be focusing on the task or assignment. And as I go through these, if you have other ideas that we could add to this list, add them in on the chat box because a lot of times you have great ideas that I might not have on my list. So it could be increasing focus on the task at hand, making positive statements to peers. So that helps with that communication and the peer relationships. It may be to increase completing work. It could also be complying with teacher requests or reading the pages of the text read during study periods. It could also be completing math computation problems. It could also focus on decreasing certain behaviors, such as calling out. You might want to work on decreasing calling out or decreasing leaving one seat or requesting teacher assistance. Laura says she could really like to work on calmly handling transitions. That's a great one. And we could actually use that in a very exact way where we're using some role playing so that they understand what it means to calmly handle transitions. And what are transitions? What are those transitions that they have a hard time with? Abby says parent self-regulation. And Abby, I think that is important. We're going to talk about adult self-regulation as well. So when you're developing this target, a really good acronym to keep in mind is SOAP. Use the SOAP acronym when you're developing this. And the very first is your S, which stands for specific. So you need to clearly and easily communicate the behavior to be observed. Because remember, sometimes we make assumptions that what we're thinking, they understand, but they may not really understand what the expectation is. So be very clear. If you say, our goal is to be good, that's really vague, right? Be very specific in what you're saying. So perhaps in this situation, we're looking at calling out because they just call out all the time. So don't call out when the teacher or another student is talking. Or we could say, decrease the number of times you call out when the teacher or another student is talking. That's more specific than be good in class, right? Or instead of saying do better in math, because that's very broad, say, let's try when we're given assignments to get 7 out of 10 math problems correct, or complete 10 algebra problems with at least 90% accuracy. Those are very, very specific. So make certain that you're very specific in your target. Also, it should be observable, right? What are we looking for? What are we looking for when we talk about this target? So if we say specifically to decrease calling out, well, then I know what I'm watching for. I'm watching for that moment when I interrupt or I call out when someone else is talking. Or I can physically look at my math paper and my math grade and know if I got at least 7 out of 10 correct. We also want to make certain it's appropriate, okay? Determine the setting in which we're going to track this, okay? So in order to make certain that we are going to track this in an appropriate situation, if we think about the calling out situation, you might not track it when you're in a group discussion or maybe when you're doing a project together. That's not really when we would track this specific behavior at this time. What we want to track is when we're doing a lecture, when we're in an actual class setting, that's the appropriate time to track this behavior. And then make certain it's personal to them, right? Make certain that it is developmentally appropriate. Okay, so make certain that this is developmentally appropriate to them. All right. And that could be, you're not going to look at your 5-year-old who's in kindergarten and say, I want you to remain in your seat for a full 40 minutes while we work. That's not really developmentally appropriate. We would have to decrease that time for a 5-year-old. So remember that SOAP to make it really specific. And Jacob, you're right. Off task, on task, that is very vague. So it may be a target to decrease off task behavior, but then we have to take that on a case by case basis and use the SOAP acronym to really pinpoint what we want to track specifically to show more on task behaviors. Now, in order to further develop the plan, once we have a very specific target in mind, we want to collect baseline data. And some of you may think, oh goodness, this is going to take a long time, but it may take some time in planning and tracking in the beginning. But just think, if you can develop this now and you develop a lifelong skill, how much time and energy you're saving in the end, and how you're helping your child or your student actually be more efficient and more successful in their work. So first, you want to collect the data because, again, we don't want to be vague about it. We want to specifically look at how frequently the behavior is exhibited now so that we can make and determine a really specific goal. So let's say that you are working on that calling out behavior. So you track how many times that student calls out or how many times your child calls out during a specific situation. Do that for about a week. And at the end of the week, you have a tally of 15 times. And it could even just be one day if you want to just look at one day across all subject areas, or it could be just a week in just math class because that's where the behavior occurs. You might notice that with some students, it is very subject related, right? The harder or more challenging the subject matter for that individual, the more behaviors start to come out. So decide what you want to track, okay? And track it for a day, 3 days, a week, whatever your goal is. And then talk to your student. We have tracked that you've called out 15 times, did I say during math class in 1 week. Do you know you do that? Are you even aware of it? And a lot of times you're going to realize that they have no awareness of calling out or getting up out of their chair or doing certain behaviors like that. So make certain you have that conversation. And once you're talking about it, but you do, so why do you think it's important we start controlling that calling out behavior? And so really start talking about that. What are the effects of you calling out during math class? And then once you have that conversation, set your goal. So last week, you called out 15 times during math class. What do you think we could do next week? Maybe 14 times or less. Set that really small, achievable goal, because we're not going to go from 15 times to 2, right? So make certain it's a small, achievable goal that we can positively reinforce and gradually build up over time. You may also want to set up a reinforcer, a reward if they reach the goal. And at sometimes, a certain student, it might be just reward enough that they reach that goal. Other times you may want an added reinforcer. So consider all of those other steps to your plan. And then we're going to start that self-monitoring process. So remember, these are steps we're going to take to help them be better self-monitors. So our end goal is that they're going to take these skills we're teaching them now, and then they're going to be able to apply them to better self-monitor in the moment. Because a lot of what we're going to talk about here is going to be reflection after the fact, or maybe a little bit after the fact. So we're just getting them thinking about their own thinking, right? Developing that metacognition. So there are 2 stages of this. The first is observation. Observation is when the child identifies or becomes aware of a specific behavior, thought, or action that occurred. Okay, so we're just becoming aware of it. And this is really important for you to remember that, like I said earlier, they're not always aware of the behavior, right? So this is the observation stage, is where you're going to make it known, help them become more aware of this behavior. And you can use these supports such as, see if I can get around here, list of appropriate actions or behaviors. So talk about what is appropriate. Also, you might use visual cues. So you see this teacher over here, she's using the visual cue of putting her finger up to her lips. Or you might want to use something more subtle that no one else in the classroom even identifies. It's just something between you and that individual. And this is important for parents to remember too. If you have that visual cue, right, where maybe you're identifying calling out, we'll just stick with that to keep it simple. And you're in a social setting and you have the visual cue to just touch your ear whenever that behavior happens. That's going to help him really identify that behavior, right? Without you saying, don't do that, and making, bringing attention to that individual. So you might want to use a visual cue. It could be a verbal cue, or have reminder notes for that individual. You might want to do some role-playing practicing. Like I think this would be really good with Laura's situation where she said calmly handling transitions. So you could actually role play and practice transitioning, or have your peers model that, right? So there are lots of different ways to help them in this observation stage, where you're actually getting them to understand and identify the behavior, okay? And this is really important within Play Attention too, because we have a full behavior shaping program within Play Attention, which is really powerful because it puts all of these support mechanisms in place and provides immediate feedback regarding certain behaviors. It gives the client or the student a one-to-one correlation on how certain behaviors affect their attention. And remember, when we use Play Attention, you have this body wave armband on, right? So your student or your child would have this body wave armband on, or yourself if you're using Play Attention for yourself. And on the back, there are 3 sensors. And those sensors monitor your brain activity that tells us how attentive you are. And then that information is given over to the computer, where you're actually able to control all of the cognitive exercises just with your mind, or more specifically, your attention alone. And we use this not just for cognitive skill training, but we also incorporate the behavior shaping. And it's so powerful because I had one student of mine, he was in second grade, my second grade class, and he would call out constantly. And I would be teaching math, he'd call out what he did over the weekend, just very random things. And when I initially had that conversation with him, remember earlier I said, make certain you ask them, are you aware of this? Do you know how it affects you or other people? So when I initially asked him, I said, Jaylon, why do you think it's important you don't call out? And he looked at me and he said, because you tell me not to. So he had no idea how it affected him. I knew he was very unaware of the behavior, but now I'm helping him be more observant of it to identify it. And at this point, he had no idea how it affected him, why it was important we would even work on decreasing calling out. He had no problem with it. He just knew I had a problem with it. And so in doing play attention, we have one activity called attention stamina. And you'll see a character going across the screen. Once he was focused and paying attention, he was able to push that whale down to the bottom of the ocean just with his attention alone. And he tried to keep it there as long as possible. And then he'd call out, I like SpaghettiOs, just random things. And immediately that character would start to float up because he was no longer as attentive. So this is that observable stage in real time, giving him feedback regarding his attentive state. This is that visual cue, the second one on this screen. We give him an immediate visual cue regarding his attention. And then I have a real teachable moment. What happened to that character when you called out? Well, he started to float up. That's the visual cue, making him aware of it. So what does that mean? It means I'm not paying attention. So in the classroom, when you do that, what does that mean? It means I'm not paying attention. So these are the first steps to helping them become better self-monitors. We do it within play attention, but you can do it in the day-to-day as well. Now, we also move on to the recording stage. So first we observe it, we become more aware of the behavior, and then we record it. So this stage of self-monitoring moves away from just the awareness to taking action, okay? And in the actually physically having them record it will oftentimes help them adjust their behavior. Okay, they're able to look at that behavior and then problem solve, make adjustments. So there are lots of different ways you could record this. You could use checklists, you could use parent, teacher, student communication sheets, maybe journaling, data collection sheets, frequency collection forms. And these are the types of forms that many of you have probably used in the past, and maybe you didn't actually make the connections of doing one of these checklists and the development of self-monitoring, but that's what we're doing. And there's lots of different ways you can do this. I'm going to share a couple of examples with you so that you can start thinking about what you want to track and how that tracking mechanism would work best for you or your child or your student. This is an example, and these two examples I got from Scholastic. They're actually very good examples. And this one is for students who are not using their time wisely in class. So you see, we have been very specific on what we want them to monitor throughout the week. Do I have classwork that needs to be finished at home? Yes, no, what is it? If the answer is yes. If I have unfinished work, how much time did I have for this assignment? Did I ask for help? Remember, that's part of that self-monitoring, knowing when to ask for help. How well did I use my time during class? And if it isn't a 4-star day, why not? How was my behavior today? If it wasn't 4 stars, explain why. So here's where you're asking them to reflect. And this, again, maybe at the end of the day or at the end of a class period or maybe midday. So it's not in the moment, but that's what we're working towards. Okay, we're putting things in place to help them start developing that ability to self-monitor. This is an example for a student who needs help with behavior, organization, and self-control. So did I sign up for lunch? Did I put my red folder in my cubby? Did I turn in my homework? Now, I know that many of you right now are doing school at home, right? We're still in that phase where we're doing some e-schooling, or maybe you're doing a hybrid. So you could really start thinking about what are the behaviors you're seeing or the performance that you're seeing during the school day, and can you set up some type of self-monitoring technique that you can start tracking from day to day. It could, if you're working with an older individual, perhaps you're going to look at completing assignments. So you write down all the different assignments and keep track of the assignment in English. Maybe you're looking at one day, maybe you're looking at an entire week. Did you complete it or did you not complete it? And then you have a percentage. So this is very specific, especially for our older students where they're having a hard time with completing assignments. And this is going to be easy for you to track, right? To get a baseline. How many assignments in a given week in math or English or all of the subjects does this individual complete? Only 40%? Let's try to increase that by putting in place some self-monitoring techniques. So they are now accountable and actually actively involved in the process of documentation, in that problem-solving type of situation. So we can track exactly what's being completed and what's not being completed. And then let's look at the comparison. Let's look at the amount of work that was being completed during our baseline week, and then look at the amount of work that was being completed once we incorporated the intervention, which was to actually track that behavior on a day-to-day basis. So a lot of different options for you. And I know that many of you right now are probably thinking about how you can incorporate this in. And you can certainly type in some of the ideas you have right now of what you'd like to track. Remember, you can look at those behaviors you want to increase or those behaviors you want to decrease. You can look at behaviors, you could look at performance. You can look at a variety of things. Just make certain you don't overwhelm your student or your client or your child, because this is going to be a lot for them to take in, and it takes some time to get that structure in place. So let's not take on too much. Start with one target and get that consistency and work from there and see how that process goes. So remember, as you're having them complete this type of reflection, you're actually allowing them time to develop those skills that they need in order to be better self-monitors. Our goal, of course, is to transition from having to have your student actually record everything to where they're just naturally doing it in the moment, right? Because remember, self-monitoring is in real time. That's our goal, is to get them to a point where in that moment, without you reminding them, without a visual cue, without a verbal prompt, they're just naturally self-monitoring and self-regulating. And so a couple of ways that you can kind of start shifting from the recording day to day, making it a specific activity where they have to write something down, to getting it to be more natural, is model it. Modeling is one of the best ways to teach. So if you're reading and you make an error in your reading, make certain you say to your child or your student, that didn't make sense. Let me try again. So you're always modeling what it means to be a good self-monitor. And then also positively reinforce your child or your student as soon as you observe self-monitoring taking place. So if you had that child earlier who read "The bunny hopes through the woods" and didn't self-correct before, but now she says "the bunny hopes through the woods" and stops herself and corrects herself, that was great. That was really good how you stopped and you thought about that sentence and you knew it didn't make sense and you corrected it. So make certain that you're positively reinforcing self-monitoring when you see it take place. And last but not least, we want to always keep in mind that this is not only important for children, our students, our clients, but it's important for adults. And it is part of self-regulation, self-monitoring is part of executive function. So if you are an adult and you have poor self-monitoring skills, remember, it's not something that you're born with, but it is something that you can develop. And so there are certain steps that you can take in order to really start developing that self-monitoring. And there are several studies that are done in this area, especially in the area of work performance. But they found that employees who develop self-monitoring skills are more productive, make better decisions, and communicate more effectively. So these are really important skills, not only as a child, but as you go into adulthood. So I know that we also talked about earlier how this is going to take work. It is going to take some time to develop this method. But if you can help your child develop these skills now and your child carries these into adulthood, it is going to help in the future, in the workplace, in peer relationships, in their jobs, their marriages, everything that they do later on in life. So you may use these self-monitoring techniques yourself if you find that you need improvement for communication skills, for personal relationships, for work performance, maybe healthy lifestyle choices or completion of household chores. So really take some time to think about some of those areas in your personal life where you are not really using good self-monitoring. Where can you make some adjustments? I have a personal story on that front. I have a very close friend, one of my closest friends. We met our first year in college. So 32 years ago, we met. And we've been close friends ever since. And she does have ADHD. And a couple of years ago, she said to me, you know, you are one of my only friends that has stuck with me through the years. And I don't know why you're my friend. And I said, why do you say that? And she said, because I just realized that after 30 years, I know you have three sisters. I don't know any of their names. And she started listing off all these things that she should know about me 30 years later, but doesn't know. And it really came down to self-monitoring. You know, when we have a conversation, she was always interrupting. She was doing all the talking. She never really asked me questions. I would say something. She never self-monitored to really think about if she processed that information or follow up on it later. So she really was having a difficult time with self-monitoring in her communication skills. And then once she became aware of it, she really started developing that. And now she always asks questions and always repeats certain things. And she's constantly self-monitoring. If she interrupts, she corrects herself. So it's very interesting process. So really think about this, not only as a child, but as an adult. What can we do to be better self-monitors? And if you're wondering how well you self-monitor, maybe it's very vague to you right now and you're really curious as to how your performance compares to that of your peers. Or perhaps you're thinking about your child. How does your child's executive function compare to that of his or her peers or your students? We do have the brief available. I know we talked about this last week. We've also talked about the focus assessment in the past, but I did want to bring this up again because many of you did the brief assessment with us last week after we discussed it. But the number one question was, well, what exactly does the brief assess? So I realized that I wasn't as thorough as I should have been in this area. So the brief is an option for you. We do offer the brief through Play Attention. and it is a behavior rating inventory of executive function. And if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, these are the different areas that it assesses. So not only self-monitoring, but also initiation, inhibition, mental flexibility, emotion regulation, task monitoring, and other aspects of organization. Sound familiar? So it's all of those areas of executive function that we've been talking about over the last few weeks are actually assessed in the brief. So this is an online survey. And if you are an adult, there's a brief, there's a self-assessment that you can take. If you have a child or a student, if they're under the age of 13, then the parent or teacher can complete the brief. If they're over the age of 13, so between that 13 and 18 range, they can do a self-assessment, but we can also have the parent or teacher do the assessment as well. So if you are interested and you would like to complete a more thorough investigation of your executive function, or perhaps your child's executive function, we would be happy to do the brief with you. Now, when you do the brief assessment, again, it's online. It's a survey of behavior rating, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And then we'll receive a full report here. And then we need to schedule about a 30-minute block of time to review the results with you. So typically that package of doing the brief assessment and then the follow-up discussion is $50, but as a way of saying thank you for attending all of our webinars, of course, you'll receive that at 50% off, as we offered last week as well. So if you are interested in us reaching out to you about the brief assessment, just type in brief in the chat box, and we will follow up with you to help you get registered for the brief assessment. And remember, it can be yourself or your child or your student. We'll talk to you about how to get started on that brief. So just type in brief, and one of us will give you a call, touch base with you to help you get registered for that. So remember, again, some of you are asking, is it just the assessment? But it is the assessment, and then also we will do a follow-up with you to review the results. Yes, we will include a written report. Exactly. Great. Okay, so you can type those in and we'll follow up with you. Now, in addition to talking about the areas of executive function that may right now be weak for you, of course, we can also talk about a specific plan to develop those core cognitive skills that are necessary for strong executive function. We've been focused today on self-monitoring, and play attention, as I already touched on, especially in the behavioral area, where play attention can develop self-regulation and self-monitoring. And we do that through integrating our feedback technology with all of these different cognitive skill areas. Now, remember, you might not need necessarily all of these different cognitive skills for your specific plan, but that's where the customization comes in. So if you need auditory processing, we put that in your profile. Attention stamina, all of us need attention stamina. We'll put that in. Working memory, short-term memory. So we'll customize the plan. But remember, all of these activities are brain enabled, meaning you can only activate the activity if you are in fact paying attention. If you're not paying attention, then the activity will stop or the character will go in the wrong direction. And then you immediately receive that feedback. Remember, this is how we develop self-regulation and self-monitoring, by providing immediate feedback. And the play attention body wave system can do that, give you real-time feedback regarding your attention. So many of us have a hard time where maybe we're involved in a task and we don't realize that for the last 15 minutes we've been daydreaming. But play attention can immediately give you that feedback so you can self-correct, right? Take action to solve the problem. That's the power of feedback technology, integrated with not only cognitive skill training, but the behavior shaping component. Now, this is an interesting one where we actually integrate the academics with the body wave technology. It could be academics or it could be a work-related task. So you notice that this student here has that body wave armband on. She has a difficult time self-monitoring while reading, like we talked about earlier. And she often finds herself drifting, but she notices it too late. So she typically will finish an entire chapter that was assigned to her. And then at the end of the chapter, when she is to summarize what was read, it's only at that moment where she realizes she has no idea what she read because she was daydreaming for about 70% of that time. So with the body wave system, as long as she is paying attention, because we're not monitoring where her eyes are, we're monitoring how attentive she is. As long as she's paying attention to her reading, then that red bar goes up above the midline, which you're going to see here in a moment as she regains her attention. And since she's not looking at the computer, she hears, good, great. Then she knows she's in that state she needs to be in order to process this assignment and finish it in a timely manner. But the opposite is true too. If her mind starts to wander, if she starts daydreaming, then she's going to hear focus, and then she has to focus in order to continue. So it's a really good way to help develop that immediate feedback that the body wave system can provide, will help develop that self-monitoring and self-regulation that she needs in order to do it at will. So really powerful technology. And as I mentioned, we'll integrate it with your specific cognitive skill areas. And then also we have reflection at the end. So we showed you how we could use these reflection types of charts during class time or at the end of the day, but we also do reflection at the end of play attention to help solidify that learning. What did you do well? What were you proud of? What do you need to improve? So again, another way we're helping to encourage them to think about their own thinking and develop that self-monitoring and self-regulation. Okay, let me make certain. Some of you have been writing in your name already, and so we will contact you because we do need specifically who's going to take the brief and also date of birth because they are norm referenced. So we will follow up with you. Okay. All right, great. So again, not only will we go through the brief assessment with you, if that's an option that you would like to take, it's not mandatory, but it's something you can do. But then we'll follow up with the review and we can talk about a specific plan that we can put into place to help develop these core cognitive skills that lead to strong executive function. Okay. So here are some next steps that kind of summarizes everything that we talked about in self-monitoring. I hope this gave you a good overview of what self-monitoring is, why it's important, and some steps that you can start taking and refining in order to help develop self-monitoring skills in your child or your clients or perhaps yourself. Next week's webinar is specifically about play attention. So if you want more information specifically on play attention and how we utilize the latest research in neuroplasticity and NASA-inspired body wave technology to improve executive function and self-regulation, you might want to consider that webinar. If you would like us to go ahead and register you for that webinar, just type webinar in the chat box and we'll make certain that you get registered for that particular webinar. Also, if you did want to take the brief assessment, just type in brief and we will set up a time and schedule you for the brief assessment as well. We'll get in touch with you on those details. And remember, you will receive it at half price. So instead of the $50, it will be $25 for that assessment and follow-up. And then finally, of course, we have that one-on-one consult available to you that many of you have seen or perhaps you've done in the past. There will be that consult with the brief assessment, but if you don't want to do the brief assessment, you just want to have a consult with us to talk about your specific needs, whether it's yourself or your child or your student, just type in one-on-one and we will schedule a consult time with you. Those are usually about 40 minutes in length where we can really discuss the different cognitive skills that you would like to strengthen and make a plan for your review so that we can work towards strengthening those skills necessary for strong executive function. So you can type in webinar if you want that webinar next week. It's same time, same station. So Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern time. The brief assessment if you'd like the brief, and then of course the one-on-one consult if you would like to do the consult. Also, we have one more. Yes, Tabitha, the consult is free. The consultation is free. Okay. Bye, Tina. Thank you for coming today. And our final executive function webinar, number 8, is going to be on impulse control. Okay. And that is going to be on Friday, the February, Friday, not Friday, it's a Thursday, but it is February, I believe the 14th, if I'm not mistaken. I will have to double check on that. But if you go to our website and you click on webinars and then special webinar, you'll see all of the executive function webinars there. But I believe it is mid-February that we will be doing the final executive function webinar. Now, don't forget, last week we did working memory, and I promised you that on Monday we're going to do a Facebook Live, and I'm going to test your working memory. So remember to watch for that. We'll be on Facebook Live. We'll send out a notification on where to click. You can go to Facebook Live, but we'll also have a Zoom link. We'll send those out tomorrow so that you have it. And we are going to meet at 11 a.m. on Monday. And I hope you have been practicing your mnemonics or your visualization, and we will see how well you've improved your working memory. All right, is anyone else? Let's see. Yes, you will receive the slides at the end of the webinar as well. Oh, Laura, thanks. February 11th or 18th. That's a good. February 11th, I think, is going to be on kindness since it's leading up to Valentine's Day. So we're going to talk about the importance of kindness and how kindness actually does improve your overall health, not only your physical health, but your mind health. So that's going to be February 11th. So the 18th, thank you, Laura, for assisting me. The 18th is going to be on the final executive function webinar on impulse control. Thank you so much, everyone. We will follow up with all of you very shortly if you typed in some information you wanted. I do hope that this information was helpful for you today, and we look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. Take care, everyone.